Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. F-100 Super Sabre, unofficially known as the Hun, was an American supersonic fighter, the first of the so-called Century series. Introduced to service in 1954, it was the US Air Force's first fighter capable of supersonic speeds in level flight. By mid-1960s, it was no longer cutting edge, but it still equipped many units, although its primary role started shifting from fighter to fighter-bomber. Even before the start of Operation Rolling Thunder, the American bombing campaign of North Vietnam, the Hun was seriously engaged in combat in Southeast Asia. The first examples were deployed to Thailand as early as 1961, and by 1964, F-100 regularly flew combat missions over South Vietnam and Laos. Operations over North Vietnam in 1965 saw the F-100 perform several duties, including flag suppression and MIGCAP, combat air patrol aimed at protecting strike formations from MiG fighters. Despite being one of the most important American fighters of the early Cold War, the F-100 never achieved what is supposed to be a fighter's primary job. It never shot down an enemy aircraft. Or did it? April 1965 saw a phase in Operation Rolling Thunder in which American Airpower focused on North Vietnamese road and railway bridges. One of them was a bridge at Than Hoa, known as Ham Rong, or Dragon's Jaw. The first attack took place on 3rd of April, and it saw the first victory claims for the North Vietnamese fighter pilots. If you want to know more about this, watch our earlier video covering the story. The next day, April 4th, 1965, saw a follow-up strike against the same bridge. 48 F-105s were the main strike element, while 16 F-100Ds were tasked with MIGCAP and ResCap duties. ResCap flight carried 2.75-inch rockets, and they set up an offshore orbit, ready to cover search and rescue forces if required. Pilots can control their aircraft movement in 3 axes: pitch, roll, and yaw. Yaw is usually controlled by rudder pedals, and while it's generally not used as often as pitch and roll, it's still very important. For your flight sims, you can compromise by getting a stick with a twist handle, but controlling all 3 axes with a single hand can be very tricky. A much better solution is buying a rudder controller such as Thrustmaster's T-Flight rudder pedals. This will enable you much finer control over your virtual aircraft's rudder, as well as wheel brakes. What makes precise rudder control so important? For one thing, taxiing will be much easier. This is especially true for some older airplanes, such as MiG-17 or MiG-21, which used differential braking to steer on the ground. With some jets such as the F-4 Phantom or F-100 Super Sabre, the pilot had to use his rudder a lot, especially at low speeds and high angles of attack. Such conditions often led to adverse yaw, and roll input would only make things worse. The F-100 is notorious for its saber dance, almost uncontrollable behavior at landings and takeoffs, which killed many pilots. The most famous such case, that of Lieutenant Barty Brooks from 1956, showed that the pilot could have saved himself by employing full rudder instead of roll. Thrustmaster offers 2 models of rudder pedals, of which T-Flight is the economic one. It's mostly made of plastic with the exception of slide rails, but I think this is acceptable in this price range. You control the rudder by sliding your desired pedal up. Even though the slide sometimes moves in a jerky fashion, this is still endlessly better than a twist handle. Toe brakes are very easy to use, and you can regulate your wheel brakes with great precision. I put the pedals against the wall, but elsewhere you might experience some sliding issues. Apart from the already mentioned use, precise rudder control can be very useful with ground strafing, countering a torque on a propeller-driven airplane, or on a helicopter. Learning to fly the latter properly is still on my to-do list, and these pedals should help me with that. With Thrustmaster's T-Flight, you will get a lot for your money. Of course, you can find it on Thrustmaster's webshop. Check out the link in the video description and use the creator code Showtime112 to support the channel. The American plan was marred by poor weather over the target and delay with the tankers. As the result, some flights had to orbit south of the bridge to wait their turn to bomb it. The North Vietnamese were encouraged by their perceived success from the previous day, and they were preparing to face the Americans once again. And just like the day before, there was a diversionary flight whose task was to draw enemies' attention by flying at the altitude of 26,000 feet. The main flight took off at 10:22, and they approached on a lower level to avoid detection. Four MiG-17s were led by Than Hoa. At 10:30, Than spotted American aircraft. It was a formation of 4 F-105 Thunderchiefs from 354th Tactical Fighter Squadron. Two sections of the Dogfight were separated by about a mile, and they were orbiting at relatively low speeds of about 370 knots, waiting for their turn to bomb the bridge. Slow, heavily laden F-105s were ideal prey for the MiGs. The MIGCAP flight of F-100s, led by Lieutenant Colonel Emmett Hayes, established their stations further north, attempting to block the presumed route of ingress of MiGs from Neubai. This put them too far away from the Zhang flight, the 4 F-105s orbiting south of the target, spotted by the MiG pilots. Than Hoa's flight was well guided by ground controllers between the F-105s and their escorts. The Thuds were circling at 16,000 feet, and Than chose to attack the one in the lead position. As the MiGs were diving, they observed no reaction from their targets. Than Hoa fired 2 bursts from about 400 meters, but missed. As the range dropped to 150 meters, he fired again from all of his cannon. This time, Than hit, and he witnessed the F-105 smoke and fall towards the ground. The Thud was piloted by Major Frank Bennett. The American pilot was able to control his aircraft long enough to fly it over the Gulf of Tonkin and eject over water, about 18 miles from Than Hoa. Sadly, he drowned before he could be rescued. The Vietnamese No. 3, Le Minh Nguyen, attacked Bennett's wingman, Captain James Magnuson. The American aircraft was hit by a number of cannon rounds, and it went straight down. Captain Magnuson didn't eject. The MiG pilots were then given the order to turn away and break off the engagement. Until this point, there is no disagreement between sources. The American side confirms that 2 of their F-105s were shot down by North Vietnamese fighters, and this is the first such case in the war. But the MiGs were immediately attacked by F-100s. Numbers 3 and 4 responded they couldn't break away because there were too many enemy aircraft. They then commenced a ferocious turning dogfight against a large number of F-100s. The MiG leader, Than Hoa, saw F-100s closing behind them. This was the northern MIGCAP flight responding to the crisis. Captain Connolly launched 2 AIM-9B sidewinders, which Than avoided by flipping his airplane upside down and pulling into a high-G dive. The high-G maneuver, however, damaged the MiG's gyro compass, and Than Hoa was unable to determine his position. Now flying at low altitude, without a working radio or compass, and with his fuel level low, he decided to belly land his MiG-17 on a flat piece of land he saw ahead. Than Hoa was successful, although he briefly lost consciousness during his landing. According to Vietnamese sources, the second MiG element, and possibly even Than Hoa's wingman, then faced and fought the ResCap element of the F-100s that was located to the south of Than Hoa. All 3 pilots, Pham Giai, Le Minh Nguyen, and Tran Nguyen Nam, ended up getting killed, and they are listed as being shot down by American fighters. The problem with this is that no American pilot was given victory credits for those kills. In fact, only one single American pilot made a claim of shooting down a MiG that day. It was Captain Donald Kilgus, a part of the F-100 ResCap, which took station south of the target bridge over the Gulf of Tonkin. Kilgus spotted something coming out of the haze and soon realized it was a MiG-17. He turned into it and then spotted another MiG. The first one overshot, but the second MiG was soon on the tail of Kilgus's Super Sabre. The American pilot shook off his pursuer and then found himself behind the first MiG, which was in turn chasing Kilgus's leader. He pulled his nose up and fired a short burst, which passed above the MiG. The Vietnamese pilot responded by going straight down. Kilgus thought his opponent had started a game of chicken. The MiG-17 was lighter and could get out of a dive faster than the F-100, so Kilgus had to be careful not to splash into the water. Both aircraft were diving fast. At 7,000 feet, Kilgus fired a long burst, knowing this was probably his last chance of hitting the MiG. He observed sparks and major pieces coming off the MiG, but soon after that, he lost sight of it. Kilgus then pulled the stick and leveled his F-100 just above the water. Kilgus was only given a probable kill that day. Nobody actually observed the MiG crash, but another F-100 pilot from his flight, Captain Ralph Havens, confirms Kilgus's story. Even North Vietnamese side confirms that no less than 3 of their fighters were shot down in combat that day. It only seems logical that one of them must have been Kilgus's victim. Several sources I found say that President Johnson was attempting to avoid Chinese and Soviet intervention in the war, and claiming kills over North Vietnamese aircraft somehow seemed to increase the chances of such an outcome, in his opinion. This extreme overcaution would continue for years and frustrate many Americans who were sent to fight there. The US Air Force's first encounter with the North Vietnamese MiGs emphasized Super Sabre's shortcomings, especially the lack of speed and maneuverability. It couldn't outturn, outclimb, or outdive the MiG. It suffered from low thrust-to-weight ratio, and it quickly bled energy in hard turns. The US Air Force replaced the F-100 in MIGCAP role very soon after this encounter with their latest fighter, F-4C Phantom. But Super Sabre was still heavily employed in air-to-ground role, especially over Laos and South Vietnam. Captain Kilgus flew at least 3 combat tours in Vietnam in 3 different aircraft types. What about the remaining 2 MiG-17s lost that day? They're listed as lost to enemy fighters, but there are no American claims to match. This is not even the only such case in this war, and the most logical explanation is that they were downed by overzealous North Vietnamese anti-aircraft units. "He who flies must be the enemy" seems to have been their unofficial motto. Thank you for your time and keep watching Showtime 112.